It's exactly 4 in Cairo. It's now time for Word of Info. Hello everybody and welcome. This is Word of Info and we're starting right away, and today we're pleased and honored to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Stephane Romatet, Ambassador of France in Egypt, and Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have His Excellency Ambassador Stephane Romatet, the Ambassador of France, for the third time, and really we are very happy, and thank you for giving us this time to come to our humble studios in Studio
Thank you so much, Amr. I feel really at home when I with you in this studio.
Yes, we love it, and we love your company. And this time we're talking. First time we talk about French-German relations, as far as I remember, and then we talked about the French music in a very successful episode. And this time we're talking about French-Egyptian relations. And who can we consult better than Ambassador Romatet, because he has a degree from the National School of Administration and a master's degree in law and political science, and he served in the embassies of his country in Jordan, Canada, Senegal, and was the ambassador in Australia, and he served in the Foreign Service office in Paris many times with a great experience. And of course you speak Arabic very fluently. This is a secret that we're going to keep. We're not going to tell anyone.
Exactly. We will keep this secret between us.
Yes. And only the people in the room.
Exactly.
Nobody knows.
But don't test me today, yeah? Please.
Of course I won't. And so we're talking about the Egyptian-French relations, and I think it's a very old relation, and I believe, as I say, that it has a very long-lasting relation, that some people think that it goes to the Crusade times, even if not earlier. It was not war as people would think, but there was a lot of communication, because when the Crusades were here in the Middle East, this was not continuously 90 years of war or so, 95 years of war. The people lived here, the people were interchanged, the people had commerce, and the people had trade, the people had speeches, and there was a lot of intermingling between human beings during this medieval periods, and then Renaissance, and there was a lot of commercial ties. A lot of French people came to Egypt in the post-Ottoman period as visitors, as tourists, and as
scientists
and commercial and business people. And I think they are the ones who even attracted the attention of Napoleon Bonaparte. Why don't you come to Egypt? Because Egypt is not just the land of magic or the land of mystique, but Egypt is a country with a lot of wealth of information. So tell us about this, about the longevity of these diplomatic relations even before your counterparts came to Egypt. I mean, your predecessors came to Egypt, right? So.
Well, thank you. You know, if you look at the longevity of relations between France and Egypt, you have to look to rewind at the very, very early ages, even at a time when Egypt as a country did not exist, even at a time when France as a country did not exist. I think the relations between our two countries, they were not countries at that time, they are, back to the Roman age. And I just want to give you two examples because they are very illustrative of what we created, centuries after centuries, decades after decades between our two countries. We have traces of Egyptian presence in France dating from probably 2000 years ago. We have in Nîmes, which is a big Roman city south of France, near Marseille, not far from the Mediterranean Sea. We know that some of the Roman soldiers who built this Roman city with beautiful theaters, etc., still existing. We know that some of these Roman soldiers came from the Nile River. Wow. And there are traces, of presence of soldiers serving under the, I would say, Roman uniform, but coming from the Nile basin. So this is a first sign. And there are also stories recalling the fact that, of course, everybody knows in Paris, Notre-Dame de Paris, the Cathedral of Paris. And there are, traces of before the cathedral was built, there was a temple, you know, in the very old age of Paris creation, and the first temple where Notre-Dame de Paris is now built was dedicated to Isis.
Wow!
So you know, long story. You know,
Well,
thousands of years.
Yes. After the break, we have to talk about that in particular because I have some information we'd like you to share with you.
Okay.
So back again, word of info, and you can call us at 2578-9407. And today we have His Excellency Ambassador Stephane Romatet, Ambassador of France in Egypt, and Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain University. Yeah, back again, word of info.
So we're talking about the effect. Actually, a friend of mine had her thesis in antiquity was about the Egyptian heritage and the Egyptian effect of Egyptian art on the Greco-Roman period, on the Greek art and on the Roman art, and how many cities had temples
This influence
were dedicated to Isis. Isis in particular was occupied the imagination and the dreams and the love of not only the Egyptians but of the Europeans, if you can call them Europeans at that time, because they belonged to Europe, but they had a lot of big relations to Egypt, and they considered Egypt to be a very big bridgehead for the empire. That Emperor Augustus, when he occupied Egypt, he was very proud, and he stamped a coin. You know this coin,
Yes,
right?
yes, right.
And written on one side is the crocodile, and the other side has his face, and written on it, Egyptus Captus.
You know, we sometimes have in mind the fact that the Egyptian pharaonic civilization was only located, you know, in what is Egypt today, without outside influence.
Yes.
But I think we have traces and we have signs of influence of, you know, Egyptian art, as you said, all across the Mediterranean basin. So, you know, there was, you know, the pharaonic civilization was really shining all across Mediterranean Sea, and we have, you know, those signs of presence, traces of pharaonic time, even in France. You know, and I mentioned Nîmes, I mentioned the Paris, etc. And if we go back, you know, to the Middle Age period. Let's keep in mind that you know, we had a very important king in our history, King Saint Louis, Louis IX.
Yes, you brought him.
And you know, in all the French students, they know that one of the big battles, you know, King Saint Louis fought was in Mansoura.
Yes,
2015.
Exactly 1250.
1251. And he was injured in Mansoura.
Yes,
and he was about to die, you know, and he was sent back to what is Tunisia now, and
Yes.
he died in Tunisia.
He was a prisoner of war in Egypt for
Absolutely,
some time,
absolutely.
and his wife paid a ransom, and after that he returned to France. But he wanted to make another crusade, and the crusade went to Tunisia, and that's where he died, and then he was canonized and considered to be a saint from that period on.
But I have to reassure, you know, our Egyptian auditors. My mission is not, you know, to get back, you know, the ransom which was paid by France in the years 1250.
And of course, by the way, you have to pay some compensation from Mansoura and Dumyata.
Exactly. So just to remind that this is a relation which dates back from the early age of history.
Yes, and of course there are a lot of sources, especially in the Egyptian Orthodox Church, that a lot of Egyptian monks have spread Christianity through Europe, especially in the period of the semi-exile or the self-exile, when a lot of Egyptian monks has chosen to go to the desert to practice their religion away from the tyranny of the pagans. Also, some of them took off the sea and went to Europe, where some rumors have it that they even reached not only the France, but they reached Switzerland, and some of them reached Ireland and reached the Britain, where they spread Christianity and were the holders of the cross in these faraway places. So I think the Egyptian-French relation goes very far away. And when Napoleon Bonaparte came as a conqueror and as an invader, as we all know, he insisted on bringing with him a scientific group of scientists. I believe that these scientists who have taken the time and the effort in examining every minute detail about Egypt and written this beautiful book, of course it's a 20-volume book.
20 volumes book.
Yes, Le Description d'Egypte. It remains to be one of the first introductory books to Egypt for France, I believe. Because before that it was the word of mouth. It was some books written by the travelers who just spent very few time, or business people who come and go. But for scientists to come in, and even painters like Conte, who started drawing pictures of Egypt, even then, of course, before Champollion was able to decipher the Egyptian hieroglyphics, yet it was a great asset. Tell us about this book. How
Yes.
much of it remains in the French memory?
You know, I have first to tell you something, because this is something I will always keep in mind. The first time I met President Sisi, soon after my arrival, I perfectly recall what he explained to me. He told me that modern Egypt was born thanks to Bonaparte. And Bonaparte, with, of course, his military expedition, but also because of the scientific, crew accompanying him, had a huge impact and responsibility on what shaped Egypt today.
It was like throwing a big stone on a nascent water, and then suddenly the water became effervescent. The Egyptians were with the shock of the defeat of the Mamluks, the artillery, the French artillery that was brought, the marksmanship of the French officers and soldiers, said Egypt was isolated. It was kept on the dark from 1516, which is the invasion of the Ottomans. They really made a sort of a curtain, an iron curtain that was surrounding Egypt, preventing it from the communication that it had all the years. So I think breaking this curtain with Muhammad Ali afterwards was a great effect.
You know, during this time, we are at the end of the 18th century, early 19th century. So Bonaparte came with, as you said, Amr, a conquest agenda. But not only, there was also a kind of civilizational, agenda, and he came with more than 160 scientists, the best in their domains, with physicians, with astronomers, with botanists, entomologists, with mathematicians, and they came and they wrote this, what we call description of Egypt, 12 volumes, and this is the first comprehensive review of what was Egypt at this time. The way people lived, their habitat, their habits, how did they wear, their clothes, how did they eat, and also the nature, not only the pyramids, but also the nature, the Nile, the first, comprehensive map of Egypt.
Yes.
This was dated, from this Bonaparte expedition.
And it had somebody who's so intelligent like Conti, who has manufactured after that the pencils, So.
Exactly. And so many of those scientists were so, attracted by Egypt that some of them decided to stay and not to go back to France with the Bonaparte.
Yes, and I think this was the first step. A lot of people always say Bonaparte brought the print house, the first printing machine. Yes, he brought it with him and he took it back, but just the shock of this print machine, the finding the papers, the leaflets, and all this stuff has really attracted the attention of Egyptians, that there is behind this deep blue sea, which is called the Mediterranean, there is civilization. There is another country. There are people who could be very friendly and who could overcome any animosity between them and start to understand. And the same goes both hands. And I believe that we owe a lot to a gentleman by the name of Champollion.
Absolutely. But what is important, and we have, those people who came with Bonaparte, these beautiful crew of scientists, they came back to France, they explained what they saw in Egypt, and they triggered a kind of Egyptomania in France. And what we call now, this passion of France for Egypt dates back from this time.
Yes.
And of course, after the discovery of Champollion, we will discuss it. This created this unique atmosphere, this unique environment between France and Egypt. And this is 2 centuries old now.
Yes.
Huh?
I'm very happy that Rosetta Stone was discovered by a French officer. And of course, it was later taken up by the British when they came.
No comment.
No comment, yes. But, I mean, things go back to the origin. So the letters and the deciphering of the hieroglyphics were made by a French scientist. Champollion really has made a difference. He had a great effect on Egyptology of today. How far his work led to Egyptomania, I believe suddenly people started to understand everything.
Exactly.
And it was just like, these are not monsters, these are Egyptians. And the pyramids were not built by people who came from the outer space. So I think this was a great explosion of information.
Champollion was young, when he discovered.
Unfortunately, he died very
early.
He died at 32 and he discovered at 23.
Exactly, but he was passionate by Egypt, and he dedicated the only 10 years, of his time, to try to decipher the hieroglyphs. And of course, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone was a major step towards deciphering. And there is one date which we have to keep in mind, because in 2 years' time we'll celebrate the bicentennial. 1822.
22, yes.
Champollion wrote a letter to his teacher, Mr. Dacier, and in this long letter he explained how he discovered through the Rosetta Stone, which was written, in hieroglyphs, in Demotic and in Greek.
Yes.
And so there was the first dictionary which could lead to reading of the hieroglyphs. And so he explained in this famous letter to his teacher, to his master, Mr. Dacier, how he came to this discovery. And this letter to Mr. Dacier was the kind of launching element which triggered, I would say, the Egyptologist studies in France. And since then we have this tradition, we are proud that Egyptology at the very origin was a kind of French science.
Yes.
And since then has always attracted so many scholars, so many students, so many fellows, and still remain very, very popular and attractive in France.
Definitely.
And you have names which are famous to every French man, of course, man or woman, but of course, Maspero, here in this building, and Christine Noblecourt, who was responsible of moving the Abu Simbel temple, and of course Mariette, Auguste Mariette, who created, the Museum of Place Tahrir.
Yes.
There are big names, French names, but they dedicated their entire life to Egyptology.
And with a great sincerity and loyalty, that is well known that when Maspero was I think Ismail Basha was approached by Eugenie herself, and told her, I love the collection and I want to have it. And so Ismail Basha was very generous. He said, I couldn't say to you no, but you have to take the permission of Maspero. And Maspero gave a flat no. Which I really admired. When I read that, I felt really shivering that he didn't want to get all this big collection out of Egypt and give it to his own country, France, because he thought that this should deserve to stay. So this gives us how loyal this man was to Egyptology.
And there was, and I think Mariette was the one who created the first, institution in charge of antiquities, with at that time one single goal, to cut trafficking in antiquities.
Yes.
And so we are very proud that the first director of antiquities in Egypt was this French Egyptologist.
And I think he's buried in the Egyptian museum.
His tomb is in the Tahrir museum. Yes.
And definitely, whenever I go there, I always show my respect to these two people who have shown their love and admiration for humanity and for civilization, more than having a small part of history by saying that we trafficked monuments. No, they
And
did.
this is not only something on the past, and I'm very struck as a French ambassador here to see how lively is our cooperation on Egyptology. And Egyptology remains in France something very, very attractive. And this is very promising to see that you have new generation of French Egyptologists always very much attracted by this science, which is of course something very special, to dedicate his life to make the choice to dedicate his life to Egyptology. It's not very it's not an easy choice, but still, studies of Egyptology are very popular in the French universities.
So more about Egyptomania after the break, because we have to talk about the effect of Egyptomania on the monuments, on the streets, on furniture in France and in Paris. Okay.
Yes, back again, Word of Info, and you can call us at 257-89407, and today we have His Excellency Ambassador Stephane Romatet, Ambassador of France in Egypt.
So, we'll talk about the Egyptian scholars. I believe Muhammad Ali has done Egypt a great favor, and he was pushed by the idea what he has seen when he came to Egypt after the French expedition, and after the void that happened, the vacuum that happened after the withdrawal of the Ottomans, and then the Brits who came in 1807. He said that we have to build a strong Egypt, and to build a strong Egypt you have to have a strong army, and to build a strong army it's not only officers and soldiers. You need architects, you need engineers, you need physicians, you need veterinarians, and you need botanists, and everything. And suddenly Muhammad Ali went and looked and found that the best choice would be in France.
Right.
And I believe that this is the period of illumination and enlightenment, because yes, these scholarships were sponsored by Muhammad Ali, by the Egyptian treasury, but the fact that the French opened the libraries, opened the universities, and accepted the total integration of these young, ambitious Egyptian people who came to study and filled their minds with a lot of important science and education. And still the French who came to serve Egypt, like Colonel Saif, who was a French colonel, then he turned to be Suleiman Basha, the founder of the Egyptian army, then Claude Bey, the famous physician, who was the one who inaugurated the Qasr al-Aini Medical School in 1827. So we are here with French scholars, teachers who came to Egypt, and as we talked about Maspero later on, and about Mariette, and people like Claude Bey and the Egyptians who went there and got the education. So tell us about this golden period of Egyptian-French relations.
This was the period of, I would say, enlightenment, as you said, Amr, for Egypt. These years, 1820, 1830s, thanks to this Muhammad Ali, the great Sultan, and he was a very Francophile. He was very much inspired also by this scientific expedition after Bonaparte. He established kept contacts with some of those scientists, and he turned to France.
And the Saint-Simons came even to here and offered their help in
exactly
the barrages,
and he took probably the greatest decision for French-Egyptian modern relations to send a team of scholars to France in 1826.
Yes.
And there is a big name which is famous in the Egyptian history. This is the name of Rifat Tahtawi, was one among those scholars.
And he was originally sent not as a scholar, he was sent as the imam of this young group of scholars to keep them on the right path of Islam.
And he was very influenced by his stay in France, and when he came back to Egypt, he had a huge influence in shaping the educational system in the country.
And he published a book.
And the
beautiful book by the name of Trend al-Abriz fi Paris, something like that, which is the golden trip, almost the golden trip to Paris.
And so Tartawi was very influential, in shaping modern relations of that time between France and Egypt. And just a short story, because of the influence of Tartawi, we have a special fund named after the name of Tartawi, in order to finance, scholarship programs between France and Egypt, and we have decided to name this fund Tartawi Fund because of the influence of Tartawi in the relations between our two countries. But I want also to mention another great name, in the more contemporary Egyptian history. This is the name of Taha Hussein.
Of course,
a great man for Egypt, a perfect Francophile,
and we can call him a Renaissance man.
A Renaissance man. He was so also influential in what is Egypt today, and especially in the field of culture, in the field of education. And I like very much the title of his memories: From France to Egypt, an extraordinary love affair.
Yes.
And so Taha Hussein, of
and
course,
this is an extra. It's a personal one and cultural one, because he married to a French lady,
Suzanne.
And,
Yes.
And Mrs. Suzanne was not just a plain lady, but a very sophisticated French lady who was an artist in and out herself, a very cultured lady, and the product is magnificent.
Absolutely.
The two children they have are unique in their education, and their cultural background. His son became a professor in France, and his daughter was married to a deputy prime minister, Zayed. I mean, these people were Renaissance people.
And I have a photo in my office, a beautiful photo of Taha Hussein. He was in his late 70s. He was, as you know, of course, completely blind.
Yes.
And I like very much this photo, the dignity of this man.
Yes.
I know how influential he was, what is his place in the contemporary history of Egypt, what he did, in the years 40, 50, 60, for the creation of the Egyptian modern state. So he's very iconic, and he's a bridge between France and Egypt, definitely. And I have to keep I have also in mind the fact that he created the Association of Francophone Writers here in Egypt. So he's culture, education is really somebody very significant in our relations.
And I'm very proud that my father, who has his degree of medicine in medical school in Cairo University, has his certificate signed with the seal of Taha Hussein as the president of Cairo University,
Yes.
which was then named Fuad al-Awwal, or Fuad the First.
And but then he was Minister of Education.
Yes, then he was the Minister of Education before even the revolution. So we're talking about a very special man, the man of Renaissance, Taha Hussein. And we spoke about Rafah Tahtawi, and a lot of scholars went. I mean, we had a lot of people, for example, like Fathi Sroor and like Farouk Hosni, and a lot of people and Atif Sidqi, who was the ex-prime minister, who had their PhDs in France, and continuity of these visits and these scholars have gone on since 1826 onwards. We cannot say that they
continuously. Since then.
Even during World War I and World War II, some of these scholars were forced to stay, and they continued their education even during the invasion, the German or the Nazi invasion of France. They stayed there and they worked on their theses and their works, and they came proud, dignified. So
you're right, and I think our responsibility, our task is to continue.
yes, this is what I'm asking. I mean, such a long chain of scholars will go both ways from the Mediterranean.
Exactly.
So how far are you helping as an ambassador here to immortalize this and increase the number?
This is certainly at the very heart of our mission. This is the core of our mission, to continue what our predecessors have built, and to make sure that these links will continue over the years. And so for us, maintaining those scholarships program, I mentioned this Tartawi Fund is something which is absolutely
it's not
crucial,
just
essential.
concerned with linguistics, because he is the founder of the Faculty of Tongues, or Alsun.
No, not only linguistics, but in every field of academic life. Of course, Egyptology remains a very strong domain in which we have these scholarship programs, but not only. And we want to develop in new fields, in science, for example, in stem cells research, these kind of things, in artificial intelligence. So we have also to build on, and to build on new domains. And this is, I think, something we ought to do in the name of those who are before us, to continue, this long history of exceptional relations between our two countries.
So I believe that there will be more scholarships that will be given to our young colleagues in all the universities.
There is a strong demand, and there are so many students who wanted to get those scholarships, and so we have to make sure that these scholars will benefit, from the generosity of the French state, and will go to France because they are the best ambassadors between our two countries.
So talking about that, I find it sometimes difficult. The French schools have been here in Egypt for quite a long time. And for some time, the French language was the language of, we'll say, the elite people of Egypt. But of course, the elite were, at that time, pre-1952, were 2% of the population or 3% of the population. In spite of that, and knowing that how French language can become very easily learned, because when the French came to Egypt from 1798 till 1801, a lot of people, when Napoleon left, a lot of people did speak French actually in Cairo, and were able to mix them.
Still.
Yes. So what makes French language not as common as the English language, in spite of the fact that there is a lot of effort and there are a lot of French schools? Always English is considered to be more spoken over. What is the effort that you as an ambassador or the French Cultural Center is applying in this route of spreading the French literature? I think Egypt is a good member of the Francophone society.
Of course, and we have all in mind, the name of Boutros Boutros-Ghali as the first, General Secretary of the Organisation de la Francophonie. But I want to pay tribute to these religious orders which decided at the end of the 19th century to establish a network of French-speaking schools here. The Jesuits, of course,
and
the Franciscans, the father, what we call the fathers,
les frères
des écoles chrétiennes, and that was, the first network of high-quality schools in Egypt,
of course,
which welcome so many, of the elite of this country, all trained and taught in French, and still, when you go and visit the Jesuits, the Collège de la Sainte Famille, Collège de la Salle, you see what is the influence of these religious schools in the country. Not only, welcoming Christians, but also welcoming Muslims.
A lot of
without any
barriers.
Any barriers. And this is what we like in Egypt. The fact that you are here in a country which doesn't divide between religion. You are Egyptian. You are not Muslim Egyptian. You are not Coptic Egyptian. You are Egyptian.
Or we are all Copts. Copts Muslims, and Copts means Egyptian.
Exactly. And this is what we like in this country. And so we have the responsibility also to continue what was created by these visionary people. To make sure that this network of schools with French programs remains and develops. So, for example, today we have about 15 schools with the French programs, mainly in Cairo. There is a huge room for expansion because there is a demand for high-level quality teaching in French, and they, welcome about 10,000 students, and our objective is to double in the years to come, to go from 10,000 to 20,000, because, and I think there is the demand, there is a request, and so many possibilities in expanding this network, and this is something really which is absolutely crucial for the best in the relations between France and Egypt.
I really admired last 14th of July, when you honored us to go there to attend your celebration. We were very happy to see that there were French students that were given the honor, that you shook hands with them, with the most elite of them, and you've given them prizes and things.
They were Egyptian Egyptian.
Yes, and
they were all. Most of them were
all
Egyptian
Egyptian
students.
students,
Yes,
and
you know the excellence of the Egyptians, the Egyptian students.
Yes, and I really admire that because this is sort of a lot of nice camaraderie and friendship.
Yes.
So after the break, we have more talk with His Excellency Ambassador Stephane Romatet about Egyptian-French relations.
Back again, word of info.
So that's a nice piece of music.
Yes,
yes. And since we are in music, before we go to the cultural cooperation between Egypt and France, we shared a secret before with His Excellency the Ambassador that he is an avid listener of music, and his home everywhere in the world, whether this is in Paris or in Egypt, is full with all types of classical music, a big classical music library. And we were very happy to share with him the famous program that we had with him talking about French music. And I was just giving a mention about Pedrafisky, the famous politician. He was a Polish prime minister who met George Clemenceau, and George Clemenceau was by training a physician.
Absolutely.
And a man who lived in the United States for some time and immigrated. Then he returned to France to become a politician. So neither he stayed as an American or he worked in his profession as a medical doctor. And when he met Pedrafsky, who was a very famous composer and pianist.
Yes.
And he told him, "Why did you stop being a pianist? You have downgraded yourself by going to politics." So George Clemenceau, who was a physician and a politician, quit medicine for politics. And you were a musician, sir.
Yes.
And this is the secret. You played cello for quite a long time, and cello is one of your dearest instruments. So we're talking about music, and this brings us to the subject that is of very dear to both of us, which is the French-Egyptian cooperation in the field of music. You have a lot of strong ties as an embassy with the Egyptian opera.
Yes. And we have this long tradition, which dates back probably decades and decades ago, of welcoming and training in France, in our National Conservatory of Music, in the French National Opera de Paris, very promising Egyptian talents, very promising Egyptian voices.
Yes.
For example, today, I think 3 years ago, we welcomed in the National Conservatory of Music a great tenor, Raga Eldin, who probably will be one of the greatest voices of the years to come. He's now, starting an international career. He was trained in Paris. We had, this scholarship. We proposed to Raga, and we are very proud if Raga, starts a great international career, to have been at the origin of his career thanks to this scholarship. And for example, Fatma Said also is another example of a great Egyptian soprano trained in France. And so we are very
and
keen
also in Jara Al-Hadidi, who's a friend of mine, but she's a mezzo-soprano.
Yes, but now she's in Dresden,
yes,
in Germany.
You have a strong tie with the German, right? We discussed that before.
Yeah, and Gala is a great mezzo-soprano.
Yes, and very special. I mean, it's very rare to have a mezzo-soprano that's courageous and full of pride and
absolutely.
Yes,
and she's a great voice
and
too.
she's a great Carmen.
Yes, and you know that thanks to this special year, because 2019 is a cultural year between France and Egypt.
Yes, this is what we wanted to bring.
And we'll have a special focus on Egypt, on music, and we will have a creation of Carmen, and
Gala will be there.
Gala is in charge of promoting and organizing this
She's
Carmen.
a very distinguished young lady,
and she will be a great Carmen, of course, and it will be displayed, shown in Paris, and shown hopefully in Cairo next autumn. So it will be a great moment between France and Egypt, and I think the musical life is absolutely part of our relations. This is something we have to put in the very center of our cultural partnership.
So part of 2019 is music, the cultural year between Egypt and France. And what else you're bringing to us?
You know that now in 2 weeks' time there will be a great event in Paris. an exhibition on Tutankhamun.
I heard about that from one of the organizers.
And this will be probably one of the major exhibitions in Paris for this year 2019. It will attract a huge number of visitors.
More than the ones that who visited in LA, right? Definitely.
Certainly, but this shows how popular and attractive Egyptology are for the French audience.
Yes.
And you can see now in the suburbs of Paris boards about this exhibition. The press coverage is absolutely very, very enthusiastic, and I'm sure that this exhibition will attract a lot of people. So this year we have decided, because this is 150 years after the official inauguration of the Suez Canal, we have decided to multiply cultural events between France and Egypt in every field. Literature, music, we have spoken about it, exhibitions, paintings. We'll have a big exhibition coming in November in Egypt, recalling 150 years of Suez Canal and this common bond between France and Egypt. We'll have dance, we'll have photographic exhibitions. In every field of the cultural life, we'll have a very rich 2019 year, the year of culture between France and Egypt.
And it was a nice thing that we start the year with a presidential visit from President Macron to visit Egypt, and he insisted on doing something which I believe was very nice, is that he came to Abu Simbel, and he has seen a place that the French and the French architect or engineer shared, and the scientists shared in saving it for the civilization after the resurrection or the erection of the high dam. So tell us about this visit, because I believe it was a very friendly one, especially when President Macron visited Abu Simbel, had his casual visit there, and then with the meetings of President Sisi, I think there was a lot of ideas to share.
And also a symbol. What can we find a better symbol to start a visit in Egypt? By going to Abu Simbel. This is a great symbol. That was the first visit ever of President Macron, who never discovered Egypt before.
Oh, really?
And so he wanted to go to Abu Simbel because, of course, in our imagination,
it's very vivid in his
absolutely.
In his memory,
he was very, very in demand about starting his first trip ever to Egypt by discovering Abu Simbel. And the welcoming he received from the Minister of Antiquities, Mr. Khaled El-Anani, who toured President Macron and his wife in Abu Simbel, and the Minister of Antiquities is a specialist of Abu Simbel. So the President stayed 3 hours in Abu Simbel. 1 hour was put in the program, but he spent 3 hours because he was so passionate, impressed and passionate by the explanations by the Minister of Antiquities, by the discovery of this site. So we stayed triple time compared to what was organized
and we have
beforehand.
Also definitely to remember the role of the French government then to save this in cooperation with the UNESCO and in the cooperation of the late great Minister of Culture, Dr. Sarwat Okasha, who was a great Francophone.
Absolutely.
And he started, he was the military attaché for some time in Paris. And then he became a distinguished Minister of Culture, who really was a man of a real Renaissance man. The man was a great man.
We owe him, the rebuilding of the Abu Simbel, the fact that this temple was saved from the lake, the creation of the Lake Nasser. And we have also the name of Christine Noblecourt, famous French Egyptologist, who advised UNESCO in shaping this program, in organizing the rebuilding of the temple. And I always have in mind one questioning: would such an operation, which took place in the 60s, be possible today? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Because you know the state of relations between the members of the UNESCO,
Yes, the fuss that is
exactly the divisions, a kind of politicization of the organization certainly will make such an operation far more difficult to organize today.
Yes.
It was possible at the end of the 50s or the 60s, thanks to, of course, the Egyptian government, thanks also to the mobilization of all the international community, thanks also to the you know, André Malraux, General de Gaulle commitment in this program, thanks of those French Egyptologists. But nowadays, if we have to face such a challenge, would it be possible for us to succeed?
Yes, always remembering.
I doubt.
I remember this period from my readings. Of course, I was very young then, but as a kid. But I understand how the role of President de Gaulle and André Malraux as a culture minister of culture, French minister of culture, a man with a great vision, and it's very important to have mega characters in political positions. Sometimes these mega characters control the seat or the share more than the share controls them, right?
Exactly. And so President Macron started his visit by Abu Simbel, and there was, you know, for him, I think, a so good entry point,
Yes.
you know, to Egypt. And then after this visit, he followed with, you know, the more, I would say, official part of
Yes.
the visit, with a lot of emphasis from his side and from also President Sisi on culture,
Yes.
you know, and how culture is something which binds very closely France and Egypt.
And there is, I think, there is going to be a lot of cooperation in the field
Yes.
of economy as well, right?
Absolutely. Economy, tertiary education, primary education, business, of course, as you mentioned, more French investment, and culture.
Of course. Sir, would you promise us to come again, please?
Anytime.
It's a great pleasure to have you with us, such a cultured gentleman, and talking about the Egyptian-French relations. We can never find better than you, sir, to talk
Thank you
about
so much.
such a rich history of cooperation. What brings us together is more than what divides us. So definitely it was a great afternoon.
And thank you so much for your kind welcoming. Thank you,
Thank you
Nagla,
very
also.
much. Thank you. It was a great pleasure having His Excellency Ambassador Stephane Romatet, Ambassador of France in Egypt, Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University. Dua Muhammad was at the controls. I'm Najla Naguib. See you next Thursday, same time, same station, FM 95.4.